Welcome to BookPeek, where legends blur with reality.
When you think of Don Quixote, you probably get a picture in your head, right? This tall, kind of goofy-looking guy in old rusty armor getting ready to charge at something. For 400 years, he's been one of the most famous characters in all of literature. But who he really is? Well, that's a puzzle that has changed a whole lot over time.
So what's the deal? Is he just the crazy guy who famously picked a fight with some windmills thinking they were giants? Or is he something way deeper? A symbol for anyone who dares to dream? A tragic hero? Maybe even a saint for our cynical world? That's the big question we're gonna dig into.
All right, so to really get Don Quixote, here's our game plan. First, we'll dive into the world he came from, this age of chivalry. Then, we'll look at what his creator, Cervantes, was actually trying to do with his satire. After that, things get weird. We'll see how the character completely transformed, and finally, we'll talk about why he still matters so much today.
Okay, first things first, we have to understand what Don Quixote was so obsessed with. This wasn't just some random fantasy he cooked up. It was an entire literary genre, the pop culture of its day, and Cervantes set out to absolutely destroy it.
This genre was basically the blockbuster movie franchise of the Middle Ages. We're talking about chivalric romances. They were these epic stories all about knights going on daring adventures, fighting for their honor, and winning the love of a beautiful noblewoman. You know, pure, romantic, over-the-top heroism.
And at the very heart of all these stories was the Knight's Code. I mean, this was a powerful set of ideals. You had to uphold justice, protect the helpless, and put honor above literally everything else, even your own life. And every single thing a knight did was dedicated to these virtues and, of course, to the lady he loved.
Now here's the kicker, and this is the key to the whole thing. By the time Cervantes was writing his novel in the 1500s, actual knights in shining armor were ancient history. That whole world was long gone. But in Spain, the books about them were more popular than ever. So you have this massive gap between a nostalgic fantasy and the much grittier reality of the world. And that disconnect? It was the perfect target for a takedown.
And this is where Miguel de Cervantes steps onto the scene. He saw his whole country obsessed with these totally outdated stories and basically thought, this is ridiculous. So he decided he was going to write the one book that would put an end to all of them.
And he wasn't subtle about it either. Right in the preface to his own novel, Cervantes lays out his mission loud and clear. He wanted to completely tear down the reputation of these chivalry books because he thought they were just filling people's heads with dangerous garbage.
So how did he do it? He created maybe the greatest odd couple in literary history. On one side, you've got Don Quixote, a guy whose brain has been so scrambled from reading these books that he actually believes he is a knight. He looks at the world and sees one big epic adventure. And on the other side, you've got his squire, Sancho Panza, a totally down-to-earth peasant who sees the world for exactly what it is. This constant clash between the idealist and the realist is what makes the whole novel tick.
And that clash leads us to the most famous scene of all, the one that sums up the whole joke perfectly. Don Quixote looks out at the horizon and sees terrifying, ferocious giants he has to defeat to prove his worth. But Sancho, and all of us, we just see a field of windmills. That huge gap between Quixote's heroic fantasy and the boring, everyday reality. That's where the satire really hits hard.
But just when you think you've got this guy figured out as a total fool, things get complicated. Because Cervantes didn't just make Quixote a joke. He gave him these moments of stunning wisdom. In the middle of all the madness, he'll say these incredible things about freedom and dignity, ideas that were actually pretty radical for the time. Cervantes put some of his own deepest beliefs right into the mouth of his madman.
So, at the end of the novel, the whole illusion just collapses. On his deathbed, the man, his real name is Alonso Quixano, he wakes up, he renounces being Don Quixote, calls the books that drove him crazy a stupid shadow, and then he dies, completely sane. And for Cervantes, you'd think, mission accomplished. The satire's complete, the fool is cured.
But the story was not over. Not even close. In what has to be one of the greatest ironies in all of literary history, the character's real journey was just getting started. After Cervantes died, people started reading the book and seeing something totally different in this mad knight.
Get this, the character that was literally designed to make fun of an old ideal,
He became a brand new and much more profound ideal himself. The punchline of the joke became the hero. How in the world did that happen?
Well, his reputation basically evolved in 3 big steps. First, the people reading it back in Cervantes' time saw him just as intended, a hilarious, crazy dude. But then, fast forward to the 19th century, and the Romantics got their hands on him. All of a sudden, he's not a comic figure, he's a tragic hero, a noble soul whose ideals were just too pure for a cynical world. And then, in the 20th century, he became something even bigger, a spiritual symbol.
This quote just nails that final transformation. Thinkers started to see Quixote's desperate struggle to believe in his chivalry fantasy as a perfect metaphor for what it's like to be a person of faith in the modern world. They argued that trying to live by a code of faith in a world that only trusts logic and science, well, it could make you look just as foolish as a man charging at windmills.
Which brings us to today and his legacy. Why are we still so obsessed with this character? A character who started out as a parody of a genre that, let's be real, nobody reads anymore. What happened, I think, is that the myth of Don Quixote basically broke free from the book. Thinkers later on argued that the character was just so powerful, he didn't even belong to Cervantes anymore. Don Quixote the legend became this immortal figure, completely separate from the guy who died sane at the end of the story.
And his most obvious legacy? It's literally in our language, the word Quixotic. It's come to mean something so deeply human, to be so idealistic that you seem a little nuts, to fight for a beautiful, noble cause, even when you know the odds are completely stacked against you.
When you boil it all down, his personal mission was to bring back a sense of honor and justice and purpose to a world that he felt had become cynical and meaningless. He was trying to revive a forgotten ideal. And that quest, that search for meaning in a world that often feels meaningless, is absolutely timeless.
So that kind of leaves us with one last thought. Don Quixote's whole quest was about fighting for a noble idea that he felt the world had lost. And it makes you ask yourself, in our own age of irony and skepticism, what are the forgotten ideals we're fighting for? What are our windmills?